Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Data Faces podcast that brings the human stories behind data analytics, AI, and marketing to the forefront. I'm David Sweener, founder of Tiny Tech Guides, and your host for today's convo. So today, I am lucky to be joined by Rich Mendis. He is the CMO at Bytemethod.ai. Rich brings a sharp perspective on how AI is being adopted in the enterprise. Not the hype. He knows what's going on. So we're going to talk about AI agents, how buyers are thinking about them, and what it's really like to bring AI into business workflows. So let's dive in. Rich, welcome to the Data Faces podcast.
Hey, David, thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for joining. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and what you're up to.
Yeah, I've been in the AI space now for coming up on just about 5 years. It was at a startup called Higher Logic, where we are applying AI and agentic AI to the domain of HR and staffing. And now we're part of a larger organization called Dexian, which is one of the top 10 IT services and staffing firms in the country, and helping them build out an AI subsidiary called Bytemethod.ai.
That is amazing, Rich. So maybe a bit of a surprise question. So this part of this podcast is to bring the human stories behind data. So when you were young, did you know you were going to be a CMO of an AI company, or what did you want to be when you grew up?
I don't think I knew I'd be a chief marketing officer. No, I always enjoyed the entrepreneurial side of things when I was young. We used to have, do these, try and create businesses with the neighborhood kids and stuff like that. So I guess startups was inevitable at some point. But I did computer science as my undergrad, so I was always a techie at heart.
Okay, so you're out there like you had your lemonade stand and all of that going
I
on
had
when
a
you were young?
lemonade stand, yeah, and then eventually got into tech stuff, and then lost all my useful skills, and now I make PowerPoints.
Well, I'm on the Google slide, so I'm a little bit more advanced on that one. But hey, let's talk about AI agents. Speaking of lemonade, so I see all
Yep.
these demos. They can schedule meetings for me. It's a little bit meh, I think. But you know,
Yep.
what does the term mean in a modern enterprise beyond, hey, it can schedule things for you? Can they do more than that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously there are, early, I would say, early demos of this stuff, and scheduling is one thing that's always a pain in the butt for a lot of people. And so you'll see common, use case demos. But from our perspective, and kind of the way I look at it is an AI agent, you almost have to think of as like a human assistant, that it's a piece of software that can reason and act autonomously on behalf of a human, um, likely pursuing like a specific goal that you've given it, and it can understand state and memory, and it can interact with other systems or other agents or other people as necessary. And the one important, caveat I like to add into that is it should especially interact with other humans when it comes to making decisions that impact other humans in a meaningful way, right? So
Right.
in the enterprise, this could be, we came from the HR space, so making hiring decisions or firing decisions or legal issues or financial matters, things like that. There's a degree to which AI agents can do stuff, and times when it should come in and loop in a human to help make decisions.
All right. So, Rich, it's a great description. So let's double click a little bit. We both work in marketing. Can you give me an example of like what an AI agent would look like, perhaps in a marketing function or
Yeah, sure. It's so many. There's a company called Litho that I've consulted to recently. They are building AI agents in the marketing space that help in the content operations world, right? So the most obvious ones I think that we all have used are generative AI to be able to help generate marketing content. But imagine agents that can help funnel that content to the right people for approvals, or apply brand voice and brand compliance on all assets that are created, and be part of that review process, right? Or can help find existing assets in a digital asset management repository that meet the requests that are coming in. So there's lots of different examples, I think, of agents in the marketing context.
that's amazing. So do you see the model moving forward? Is it going to be, you mentioned there could be a number of agents interacting with humans. So do you see the model is going to be like there's an agent per task? Are they going to be more specialists or generalists? I think is what I'm is running through my
Yeah.
head.
I think just like on, humans, you'll have both, right? You'll have generalist or horizontal agents that are performing a function across, business units, or you'll have highly specialized, or not, or and you'll have highly
Mm,
specialized agents that are performing a specific function, right? So if you take a look at a hospital, for example, you might have agents helping, an X-ray technician interpret data that's
mm.
coming across, but then you may have a horizontal agent that's going across a variety of things to understand, how to do billing in a medical setting, right?
Right.
And so I think you'll have a mix of both.
Okay, I like that. So, given that we're going to have this army of agents, what's the one misconception that enterprise AI that you see repeatedly in your conversations?
Yeah, I think, man, there's so many, but
So many.
I think,
We're pretty nascent, right? So,
yeah, I think, the two that I would highlight are, people tend to think of this technology as as a general capability, like, um, you know, or like a product that you can just plug in, like, hey, I've got this AI agent, I'm going to plug it in and do something. But it's more like, AI is more of a horizontal capability, agentic AI, like electricity or the web, right? Saying you're using the
mhm,
web is as meaningless as saying, I'm using AI. So I
right.
think it's more about, understanding how to embed, an agentic process into your workflow, give it clean, data, governance, the governance aspect, et cetera, on which to operate, and give it a task. And I think there's a lot of, you know, um, I don't want to say hype is the wrong word, but overestimation of capability, right? We
Mm.
are sort of in the early days, like I like to say, we're in the Netscape Navigator days
Oh,
of
yeah.
AI, right? Or Emacs days, I'm probably dating myself now. But there's this notion of Amara's law, which is where, humans tend to overestimate a technology in the near term and underestimate its impact in the long term,
Hmm.
because things
Sure.
change in a nonlinear way, and AI is very nonlinear. And I think we're in the overestimation phase right now, where I don't think it's so much about what can agentic AI, what humans can it replace, but rather how it can complement it, right? How it can complement humans, with humans in the loop, and achieve things together. So AI plus human, as opposed to AI versus human.
Yeah, that's how I use them. Personally, and
Mhm.
what I do, I have a bunch of agents that, one knows everything about my business. So I use it for that. One knows
Mhm.
everything about how I write content, and I use it for
Yep.
that. So totally agree with you. It's a co-pilot for me. But, what's in terms of use cases and enterprise use cases, what are some real world examples that you're seeing that are maybe actually
Yeah.
deployed in B2B companies?
Yeah, we kind of bucket use cases into two categories: design time use cases, or productivity, right, which is the configuration and creation and maintenance of enterprise assets, and then the runtime, which is what most people think of when they think of use cases, which is tasks that are helping people perform, perform operations, in their day-to-day work. And I'll give you an example on both. So on the design time side, enterprises have a bunch of existing software, right?
Hmm.
Salesforce, ServiceNow, SAP, and so on. And a lot of time is spent by IT and development maintaining and configuring those solutions, right? So for
Sure.
example, in ServiceNow, you may have a service catalog item or a ticket where you have to create a form, and people are constantly adding and maintaining that. And it takes time, days, weeks, or longer to configure it. An agent on a design time side could be something that understands your requirements around ticketing or any other aspects of ServiceNow, and you can give it your requirements, and it goes and not only can produce the steps required to configure ServiceNow, but it can actually log into your ServiceNow environment, development environment, and actually go and configure it to meet your requirements, right? So,
Mm,
and what I like about that example is it's also having the agent perform tasks that humans would manually go do,
sure.
um, in a sort of simulated environment. So pretty interesting use case with that, and significant opportunity for time savings and things like that. On the runtime side, one that we love to talk about is conversational analytics agents. So if you think about a lot of business processes, whether it's updating a CRM, updating an HR system or whatever, humans, have these meetings where we meet face to face, meeting with a prospect, meeting with a candidate, so forth. And then after that meeting, we go and enter data into an enterprise app, right?
Sure.
Conversational agents can listen to those conversations, understand the context, look for specific sets of data that that's meaningful, and automatically populate those systems or take actions or so forth. So that's another use case that we see commonly that we like to talk about.
It's really interesting. So that brings up something. I like this how you framed it. This design time versus runtime.
Mhm.
How do you verify that, in the case of the service now where you have a catalog attribute, that it's putting in the right stuff? Like, I know you gave it rules.
Mhm.
I talk to the LLM all the time and it spits out gibberish,
Yeah.
probably 50% of the time. So how do you have to always verify, or do you have another agent check its work? Like, how do you think about the governance piece of it?
Yeah. Well, this is a good, leads to a good conversation about kind of how the model's trained, right? How the agent trained itself. So, in the case of, let's take a conversational analytics solution, listening to a live interview, for example, where you have, a hiring manager interviewing a candidate, um, you could take a transcript of an interview and throw it into ChatGPT and ask it like to summarize questions or things like that, and you'll find it's not always accurate, right?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, that model is trained on only what's available on the internet. And how many companies publish their interview data on the internet for models to train?
Sure.
Zero, right? And so what's important to understand is the process, the task that the agent is performing and the underlying model it's using need to be trained on whatever that domain or task specific requirement is, right? So in the case of the live interviews, you have to go take actual interview data, which in our case, in the previous company I mentioned, we took millions of interview minutes, organic interview minutes, and trained a model to understand things like who's the speaker role, right? What is casual conversation you want to strip out
Right.
of the interview analysis? If you're trying to detect the interview questions, how do you skip rhetorical questions or statements that sound like questions and all those things? So there's lots of domain specific training that's required. And this is the same case with agents. To ensure that you're getting the outcomes you want, is the more time you spend up front in the model training, the better the outcome is, and the less sort of manual verification is needed.
Hmm. That's really interesting. So, like, I mean, I totally get that. And so how do you like verify that the outputs
Hmm.
of these at
Hmm.
scale are accurate? And I come from, as an example, I
Yeah.
come from the predictive analytics world. I don't even know if I can say that word. It's dating myself.
Yeah.
But you get a prediction, it's a number.
Yep.
We understand numbers and it's within distribution. We can detect drift and if it's going haywire or not. But when we're generating text, pictures, image, audio at
Hmm.
scale, how does a company even think about monitoring something
It's
like that?
it's really, it's a very good question. And it from our perspective, there's three important aspects, right? So one is make sure that you've actually trained and tested the model correctly, right? So to the extent that you've trained it on the outcomes that you're really looking for with reinforcement learning and things like that, that you have fairly good confidence out of the gate that it's working in the way that you want. The second is making sure there's alignment and guidelines there, right? So for example, we have built chatbots that allow you to ask questions after an interview about a candidate, and you want to avoid situations where you're asking subjective questions or it's giving you subjective answers. And
Sure.
so you need proper guidelines so that even if it so that it doesn't give you inaccurate answers, right? It tells you that it doesn't know, rather than trying to make something up or hallucinate. That's a
Right.
really important aspect.
Notebook LM does something like that. If it doesn't know, it's not in its the
Exactly.
corpus, you put it's like, I don't know, but I can guess for you.
Exactly. And then of course you can do, right, some agentic validations. Very interesting. There's more and more frameworks that use that sort of enable agents to learn, or that are using agents collaboratively to debate the outcome, right? So I saw an interesting paper last week where someone was creating a zero-shot, internet content detection bot to try and understand if the content is harmful.
Mhm.
And the classical model is you have to train it on previous harmful tagged content, right?
Sure. Yep.
But what happens when there's a new piece of content? So this paper talked about, this is an academic paper, but it's very interesting, talked about having two agents debate whether the content is harmful or not, right? So it's almost like going back to the original definition of an agent is something that's almost, simulating a human. Well, why not simulate debate that humans would have about whether content is harmful or not, and utilize that, process as part of the output?
Oh, I do. That sounds really interesting. Um, can I talk? Can I ask? Double click on the training piece.
Mhm.
So we know data has been a mess in every organization since the history we've been collecting data. How do companies like? Are you confident that they're going to get their
Yeah.
data in the right shape and format so these LLMs can be trained properly?
I think this is one of the biggest challenges, honestly, David. And the reason I say that is it's one of those areas that's very easy to underestimate or underinvest in because you're
Mhm.
so eager to get to the outcome, and the
Right.
outcome, right? Like when you first start using an LLM, for example, or an agent, even if you haven't trained it properly, it appears like, oh man, this is like magic. It's giving us some good information, right?
Yep.
But it's only later on when you've used it over and over again at scale do you start to realize some of the shortcomings or inaccuracies or hallucinations and things like that. And so what's really important is investing, and it's as much of an art as it is a science, to be honest, in the early, part of understanding, based on the outcome I'm trying to have this agent or model achieve, what data do I have to, train it on? Do I have a sufficient quantity? Do I have a sufficient quality? Is it properly annotated and labeled? Or if it's, in data, unstructured data for a RAG corpus, have I chunked it and split it correctly, right?
Yep.
And as you know, it's an abstract problem. Like you can easily invest in that step of the process, and you don't really realize how that underinvestment materializes until much later on after you've deployed the solution, and you start to
Right.
realize, oh, it's not quite giving me what I want, or why does it keep hallucinating in these areas, right? And so I think, the one piece of advice absolutely that I would give to customers is make sure you engage the right folks, the experts either within your organization or from outside, who truly understand the data that's involved in the judgment making, right, of the human today that you're trying to kind of simulate with an agent or with a model.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. I mean, if I just look at my Google Drive, I mean, I got version 1, 2, 3, 4 of the same document. I probably should be using version control. That's a different problem. But like, if you got the duplicate PDF in your, say, RAG system, you like, how do you know that? So I think there's a lot
Yeah.
for
Or
companies to think
even
about.
little things like the footers in a document. What happens when you put that into a RAG corpus, right? There's all these subtleties that
Yeah.
it's not always obvious that you kind of realize later on.
Okay. So this brings me to the next question then. So we've talked about data being a mess, and if I think back to my, analytics data science days, I
Mhm.
always tell people the world runs on spreadsheets. Now we're talking about agentic AI and AI agents. So what signals should leaders look for inside their organization to know they're culturally and technically ready
Yeah.
for these autonomous agents?
Yeah. This is a great question. And I think, my perspective on this is the readiness state of an enterprise is less, I think, something that should be looked for or monitored for emergence, and more something that should be proactively prepared for, right? So from what we've seen, I think two important aspects, right? um, One is having sort of what I would call risk mitigated freedom, right? To
Ooh,
experiment. Like if you want an organization and its employees to be able to find ways to efficiently use AI and things like that, you have to enable them with the tools and the freedom to experiment, whether it's with models, agents, or what have you, but in a risk mitigated way, which might mean sandbox environments or
Sure.
LLMs that maybe you take a couple of frontier models you've negotiated contracts with, and they're not using to they're not training those models on your data, things like that, right? So I think that's really important. One aspect, which is whether it's and you don't have to go overkill on data governance and have all these role-based access controls. If you have provenance and lineage and all that stuff, that's great. But you can just start with a sandbox, give them access
Sure.
to APIs and data to get going. The second thing that I think a lot of people miss, and you mentioned cultural, the cultural keyword here is, do you have the right incentives in place? At the end of the day, these are humans, right?
Right.
Experimenting. Are you gonna, tell them that, hey, if you find efficiency, we're going to eliminate half of your organization because now you've got, something that's more efficient, right?
Yeah.
Or, having too much of the stick, like, I've seen some organizations almost like force fit AI and measure people, create these objectives, right?
Right.
And they don't even understand kind of, what they're trying to do with AI, right? And there's a lot of data. I think
Sure.
something like 97% of businesses are struggling to show value in AI. I think because they're just throwing stuff up against the wall without really much thought to see what sticks.
Right.
And so I think having the right incentives for the employees is also important, right? This
Hmm.
is something leaders have to actively cultivate.
Hmm. I like this. I think that's hugely important. Incentives and um, that like this risk mitigated freedom to experiment. That
Yeah.
like something a question came to mind when you mentioned that. Do you think there's going to be a different type of person that is going to be maybe more prominent or take a more active role in this? And as an example, prior to generative AI, you had to have a PhD in data science, right? You've heard this before, but
Yeah.
now you can just talk to this thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you think roles are going to shift, or are people with business knowledge going to become more important and can
Yeah.
start to prototype or create these things? I'm just curious your
Yeah.
perspective
No,
on that.
it's a good question. I think that I think that the domain knowledge, right, has always been important, right? This is like content is king sort of thing.
Sure.
And I think that the abstraction of leveraging AI and AI technology will enable people who are more domain experts in that area, or not subject matter experts, knowledge experts, to be able to leverage AI a lot more easily than in the past it required you to be work with a developer, right, to take your knowledge and implement an application.
Hmm.
I think, to your point, the fact that you can simply talk to this, to talk to AI, and there's all these design time assistants, coding assistants,
Yep.
designer assistants, all that stuff. I think we're accelerating the democratization of programming, right, to the point
Right.
where anyone can write at least a basic functional program. And so I think we'll enable subject matter experts now, wherever they happen to be in the organization, regardless of their technical ability, to be able to leverage automation in really meaningful ways. I think we'll see lots of interesting solutions come from people who are not necessarily, kind of your traditional IT developer sort of folks.
Yeah, I love that. I try to use it for design things. I'm not an artist, but I can get some cool images. I do
Yeah,
find I don't have the vocabulary to get
yeah,
out what I want, but
yeah.
I can learn.
But you can
But
do a draft. Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
yeah,
Like, hey, here's a mock-up of kind of what
that's
I
right.
want, and a professional will get it done. But do want to ask one question about the right incentives,
Mhm.
and maybe not. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too far,
Yeah, yeah,
but we see all these headlines in the paper about AI is going to automate your life away, and this company's laid off this many people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah,
Like, do you have a thought on what these incentives are? I mean, I
yeah,
don't know if I believe any employer. They want
yeah,
productivity and profitability
yeah.
perspectives.
I have this discussion, sometimes debate with a lot of my friends, right, about these articles. At least from what I've seen, David, I don't think anyone can be making mass layoff decisions based on AI today. Like, I just don't see it. And we're working with customers that would love to find efficiency and lay off, hundreds of people to be able to achieve this. And it's not that easy. Like the
Right.
tech is simply not at the point where, you know, I challenge people with this exercise, right? in a given week, okay, make a note of how many people you interact with in a given week.
Yep.
Anywhere. It could be the hot dog vendor at the corner of the street. It could be the person in HR, the legal department, a customer, or what have you. And ask yourself, how many of those people could you have replaced with AI?
Mm,
Okay. And I believe the answer today will be very, very few, if not none.
right.
Right. And so I think the reality, of course, with productivity, there's a continual march towards efficiency. But efficiency doesn't necessarily mean less people, right?
Right.
Efficiency could mean more people doing a lot more things, right?
Right.
There was a great, I can't remember where I read it, but somebody was talking about, saying that in their perspective, encouraging people not to learn programming because nobody will program anymore would go down as the worst advice in the history of education.
Right.
And their argument was based on historical precedent. If you think back to software development, back to the early days, slight digression here. In the early days of, say, mainframe enterprise applications, it was a very, very narrow group of people that could program and build these mainframe
Right.
applications. Okay. Then that got abstracted by 3 and 4 GL languages, right?
Hmm.
Did that mean there were less people doing work or
Right.
more? In fact, there were a lot more people doing programming then, right? And if you abstract these 4 GL languages to now being able to generate code by talking to a chatbot, will that mean that the number of enterprise application or the demand for enterprise applications will decline?
Mm,
Or will there just simply be a lot more people creating enterprise applications that do a whole set of different things, right?
right.
And so the debate is, is AI, are these layoffs happening with AI as an excuse, right? Or in the hope that AI will somehow, replace these people? I don't know. But going back to your question on incentives, look, if you're trying to, at the end of the day, incentivize a human to be more efficient, align his incentives or her incentives with being more efficient,
Right.
right? Hey, if you can use AI to do your job, right, that takes 5 days a week in 4 days, I'll give you the fifth day off.
All right. I got it. This is recorded, Rich. I want my 4-day work week that Bill Gates has been
Exactly.
promising us.
Why not, right? If you can, if you can figure out how to use AI to automate some mundane thing that everyone in the billing department hates doing, then go automate it and tell us what you'd rather spend the time on,
Right.
and we'll give you that task, right? Why do humans have to do kind of the boring tasks that AI could do? Let them figure out innovative ways to automate it so they can do more interesting things for the company, high value things.
I'm inspired now, Rich. Thanks for that response. I'm more very positive about this now. I go back and forth depending on the week, so I do think it's going to be
There's a
great.
lot of there's a lot of doom and
There
gloom out
is a lot of doom and gloom, but I do think, and I've had past guests that mentioned, you look at the history is what's going to happen in the future. I think there's going to be jobs we don't know about that are going to
Yeah,
come along for sure.
exactly. I mean, look, the way I describe it is there will be jobs that are gone, but it's not that it's gone overnight, right? Like AI is replacing skills, right? So a
Mhm.
skill that you needed is now something that AI might be able to do. And a job consists of many, many skills that you're using in conjunction, right?
Right.
So as AI replaces those skills, the job itself will change, right? So it'll eventually change to the point where that job is unrecognizable from the version it is today.
Yep.
So it'll appear like the job is gone because the classic version of that job, accounting, legal, whatever, may not exist, but it exists in some new form that we can't imagine today.
Right. Yeah, I've seen these government. I don't know. I forgot. Was it the occupational whatever? There's like 137 skills or whatever it is. Every job has, and they rate them for every job
Yeah.
category. And so yeah,
Yeah.
that's going to automate some away. But let's talk a little bit about trust.
Mhm.
Um, you know, provenance and lineage. How important is that? If people don't trust the systems, they're
Yeah.
obviously not going to use it. Is that we need to think about that? How important is it?
Yep. Look, I think this goes back to, again, what's the foundation of having a good agent or model is the data, right? And so, the data it's trained on has to be trustworthy. You have to know where it came from. Um, that's to me a foundational aspect of making, ensuring success with AI adoption. And then the other aspect is trust in the behavior of the agent. Since we're talking about agentic AI, what are the guardrails, right? That you've put around an agent? What can human ask an agent to do? What task can an agent perform? What can it not perform? I was reading recently that, you know, some agents are autonomously making a decision to contact law enforcement based on how
Oh,
someone's using
geez.
it, right?
What could go wrong?
How do you define that, right? Like, so I think there's a lot of, I think in the era of AI, trust is going to become so important, even just on the consumer side, right? Am I trusting that this is actually live footage or was it AI doctored, right?
Yep,
Huge trust problem to the point
exactly.
where we're regulating it, right? And you'll have the same issue in the enterprise, right? Is this based on accurate data? Is it good judgment? Can I trust it to take the following actions on my behalf? I do think trust is going to be important, and it goes beyond just the data itself to the actions that it can perform.
Yeah, lots of things for people to think about for sure. So we're coming up near the end of our time, Rich. So maybe the final question on agents is, if everything is autonomous, we have these autonomous systems, and I'm like the Matrix. I've like got the Matrix in my head now with all these agents running all over. But what remains uniquely human, with how we make decisions with data?
Yeah, look, I think, for me personally, and at Bytemethod, our organization, we are in the business of helping um, companies implement agentic AI to automate process. But even we recognize, and I think everyone does to some degree, and we've been involved in the development of responsible AI management systems like standards like ISO 42001 and others. Um, where it comes down to is, I think the there'll be rote tasks that are automated by agentic AI, but the certain aspects, the ability for humans to interpret imperfect data
Mm,
and through the lens of ethics and understanding context and intent is really, really important, right? And this is especially important in the case where you can take an action that impacts a human, right? We
right.
mentioned hiring and promotions,
Sure.
healthcare treatment, right? Legal rulings. These are decision points that require humans to make a judgment with imperfect data, right? And it's really important to understand the motive and the consequences and impact of that decision on a human,
Mm,
right? And I think we can automate. I think one of the positives to stay optimistic here is, can we automate as much of the rote low level stuff as possible with AI to give us more time to think about those truly important decisions that have long-term big consequences and impacts on society,
mm. I
right?
think you couldn't have said it any better. And I wrote this down. Don't forget the impact that can be made on humans. And so it's
That's
I
right.
I really appreciate that sentiment. So, any final closing thoughts? Where can people find you, your organization, or how do people get started? Whatever you want to close on there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of companies and organizations out there. I think, Bytemethod.ai, you can check our website out, Bytemethod.ai. We're focused on kind of ROI driven value around AI automation, right? So there's lots of AI for the sake of it and things like that. But, we're taking an approach where we try and identify where there's the biggest opportunity for either cost savings or, productivity increase, revenue increase, whatever the case might be. And we take sort of milestone-based approach to help prove not just the technical feasibility, but the fact that you can capture the ROI and expand from there. We'd love to, have discussions like this or explore other opportunities at any time.
Well, Rich, this has been an amazing discussion. I want to appreciate you joining the Data Faces podcast, sharing your expertise, and I think this is going to be a great one for the community. So, appreciate you joining, and thank you very much.
Thanks again for having me, David. Pleasure.
All right, cheers.
Bye.